All right, so have you ever tried to really picture your ancestors from way back when? I mean, we're talking like 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Not just names on a family tree, but like actual living, breathing people.
It's one thing to see a name and a date on a page, but it's another thing entirely to imagine them walking and talking, living their lives.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing in this deep dive. We're going way, way back to Bronze Age Britain with your 131st great-grandmother by Paul Elms Bacardi.
Okay.
1315 BC, forget cars, forget cities, even forget castles.
This is long before any of that.
We're talking rolling chalk hills, the South Downs of England, where Artha's story
A
unfolds.
very different England than the one we know today.
Right. Her village was near what's now Mile Oak. And the book, The Life of Artha, my Celtic 131st great-grandmother, paints this really vivid picture of what it was like.
It really does. It's amazing how such specific details can transport you back in time,
Like it mentions their houses, these wattle and daub huts.
which if you're like me, you might have to look up.
Huh. Yeah, they're made of woven wood and clay. Super practical back then.
I mean, can you imagine building your own house out of sticks and mud?
Right? Talk about resourceful. And life just moves so differently then. Everything revolved around the seasons.
A far cry from our 24/7 world.
Tell me about it. So we've got this image of Bronze Age Britain, but the book gets even more specific. It says Artha's people, the Haedui, had been in that region for ages. They weren't newcomers at all.
They were deeply rooted in that land.
And get this, she was said to have these piercing gray eyes, which were super rare back then.
Really?
Yeah, the villagers thought it was a sign from the gods.
You know, that seemingly small detail about her eyes is actually really significant.
How so?
Well, it tells us about the genetic makeup of her community. For gray eyes to be that uncommon, there had to be limited genetic diversity.
Interesting. So her eye color isn't just a cool detail, it's a clue about her whole population.
Exactly. It suggests they might have been relatively isolated, which has implications for things like disease resistance and their overall resilience.
Wow. I did not see that coming. I love how these little details can unlock bigger understandings of the past.
It's all connected.
So we've got this picture of Artha in this small village. What was daily life like for her?
Well, for one thing, life in the Bronze Age was often about survival. The details we get about daily life are fascinating.
Right. The book talks about her people farming, raising sheep and goats, classic countryside stuff.
It was all about working with the land to provide for yourself and your family.
But then it mentions them being traders, too.
Ah, yes, their trading network. That's crucial.
They'd travel all the way to the coast to swap goods with folks from far-off lands.
This wasn't just a local barter system either. They were plugged into a much larger world.
Hold up, trading with people from other continents in the Bronze Age.
That's right.
That's incredible. It's like ancient globalization.
Precisely. And it really challenges our perception of the Bronze Age. This wasn't a period of total isolation as we often think. These were sophisticated societies connected by trade routes and cultural exchange.
Okay, so we've got this bustling village plugged into a wider world. Where does Artha fit into all this? What was her childhood like?
So she learned herblore and healing from her mother, who is the village healer.
An essential role, especially back then.
Absolutely. But then the book mentions something else. Artha also learned to hunt alongside her father.
Wait, both? I thought the Bronze Age was all about strict gender roles.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? It's a detail that really makes you think.
It really does. Was she a total outlier, or did her experience reflect a broader trend in her community?
It's hard to say for sure based on just this one example, but it does suggest that our assumptions about the past aren't always accurate.
And either way, talk about being adaptable, knowing how to heal and hunt. That's someone you want on your side.
Absolutely. Those skills would have been essential in a world where survival was often uncertain.
Okay, so she's clearly no damsel in distress, this Artha.
Yeah.
So speaking of defying expectations, the book dives into her marriage to a man named Eamon. Now, Eamon was a metal worker, which in the Bronze Age, that's a big deal.
Big deal is an understatement. Bronze was the cutting-edge technology back then. Tools, weapons, status symbols. It all came down to skilled metalworkers like Eamon.
Right, so this wasn't just a love match. I mean, the book mentions them falling for each other, but their marriage, it was also a major power move for both their families.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Two essential lineages coming together, the healer and the metalworker, uniting their skills and resources for the good of the community.
It really makes you think about how much more complex these societies were than we often give them credit for.
Absolutely. This wasn't just boy meets girl. This was about forging alliances, ensuring the transmission of vital skills, and securing the future of their community. It speaks to a level of social complexity we don't always associate with prehistory.
And it clearly worked because they went on to have 4 kids. The book talks about each of them. Breogan, the eldest, followed in Eamon's footsteps as a metalworker.
Carrying on that essential craft.
Then there's Eileen. She took after Artha, becoming a healer.
Another vital role in their community.
But then there's Dana. She's described as this wild spirit, always off exploring. And finally, Elric, who inherited Artha's striking gray eyes.
It's like a little piece of Artha living on through him.
It's amazing to think about those connections, isn't it? But back to those kids for a second. It's interesting how their paths reflect the different facets of their society. Like Breogan and Eileen carrying on those essential skills that points to a system of hereditary knowledge transfer.
Right. Exactly. Certain skills were so vital to the survival of the community that it makes sense they would be passed down through families.
But then you have Dana, whose adventurous nature suggests a degree of individual agency that we might not expect, especially for a woman in the Bronze Age. It makes you wonder about the limits of those assumptions, right?
Absolutely. We paint these broad strokes about the past, but then we find these hints of nuance, these individuals who push the boundaries of what we think we know.
And that's what I love about these deep dives. We get to see those individual stories and how they challenge our understanding of the past.
It's not just about facts and figures. It's about real people living their lives, and sometimes breaking the mold.
So we've got this thriving family, vital skills being passed down, signs of a more complex social structure than we might expect. But let's be real, this was the Bronze Age. Life wasn't all sunshine and amber necklaces. What were some of the challenges Artha and her family would face?
Well, the book paints a picture of both opportunity and danger.
Mm.
They had fertile land, but they were also vulnerable to raiders from other tribes looking to steal livestock or resources. And then there's the wildness of the landscape itself. Remember, this is prehistory. We're talking dense forests, wild animals. Life was precarious.
So Eamon's metalworking skills weren't just about making fancy tools, they were about protecting the village. And Artha's healing knowledge, man, she must have been busy patching people up after raids, animal encounters, or just everyday accidents.
Exactly. Their skills weren't just professions. They were essential for the survival of their community. And it wasn't just violence they had to contend with.
Yeah.
The book doesn't go into detail, but they would face diseases we've long forgotten, harsh winters, maybe even famines.
It makes you realize how different their relationship with nature must have been, right? Today we think of going back to nature, but for them, nature was a much more immediate and often unforgiving force.
Absolutely. Their lives were so intertwined with the natural world. They depended on it for their survival, but they also had to constantly navigate its dangers. It really puts things in perspective.
And yet their village thrived. They expanded their fields, their influence grew, and their story continued through their children and beyond. Speaking of continuing their story, there's one more aspect of Artha's life. I want to touch on her death. The book describes it with such care, almost a reverence, and it reveals so much about their beliefs.
It's a powerful passage, isn't it? The way they laid her to rest, facing the rising sun, it speaks volumes about their connection to the natural world and their belief in a life beyond this one.
It really does. And it's not just about where they buried her, it's what they believed happened after.
Right.
Like her soul returning to the land, rejoining the spirits of their ancestors. It's this whole different way of thinking about death and what comes after.
It's a beautiful concept, isn't it? This idea of cyclical time, this deep connection to the earth that feels so different from how we experience death and dying in many modern cultures.
It's humbling almost, to think about how connected they felt to the land and to their ancestors.
And it's not just a feeling they had back then. The book actually draws a direct line from Artha to your 14th great-grandfather, John Elms of Hastings.
Wait, really? So we're talking about over 3,000 years of history here.
Exactly. From this Bronze Age woman to you, an unbroken chain across millennia.
Wow. I mean, I know we say every deep dive connects you to the past, but that just hits different. It's like all of a sudden it's not just history anymore, it's personal. Like if Artha hadn't learned those skills, had those kids, my family tree would look totally different.
It really makes you think about the ripple effect of a single life, doesn't it? How each of our ancestors, no matter how far back, play a role in shaping who we are today.
Okay, now I have to know, are there more Arthas hiding in my family tree? Because this makes me want to go digging for more ancestors to learn about.
And that's the beauty of it. It's not just about names and dates on a page. It's about connecting with real people who lived, loved, struggled, and triumphed in a war vastly different from our own. It's about uncovering those hidden stories and realizing that history isn't some distant, irrelevant thing. It's alive in each of us.
So there you have it, your very own glimpse into Bronze Age Britain, all thanks to your 131st great-grandmother, Artha. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little more connected to those rolling hills of England now, and to the power of family even across thousands of years. So until next time, keep those curiosity gears turning. You never know what incredible stories you might uncover when you take a deep dive into your own past.